Good morning and a warm welcome to the final session of NUS-ISS Learning Festival 2025 edition. In its 10th edition, this year's Learning Festival is themed Always Learning and Always Leading in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. Today is the culmination of our Learning Festival after a wonderful in-person Learning Festival on 5th September and several engaging virtual sessions over the past 3 months. My name is Alexandria and I will be your MC for today. Do note that our entire event will be recorded and is best viewed on a laptop or desktop. If you have any questions, do pop them into the Q&A section of the chat for the Q&A session later. Without further ado, we now welcome Ms. Clara Lee, Chief of Data Science and Digital Sustainability Practices at NUS-ISS, and Mr. Arun VT, Technology Sustainability Lead at Accenture. Their session is titled Building Green AI Systems for a Cleaner Future. Clara and Arun, please.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Today, we're going to talk about building green AI systems for a cleaner future. Together with me is Arun from Accenture. He is the lead of Technology for Sustainability.
Hi, Clara. Thanks for having me here. It's a great opportunity, and I'm honored and pleasure to be here and spend the next 40 minutes with you to talk about this very important topic.
Welcome. So, how are we going to talk about spending the 45 minutes later on? Well, I will explain about why bothers, why it matters, and Arun is going to tell us how. So let me start with why. Why bother about climate change? You probably have seen this picture many times, that this is so representative of what is happening. And our polar bears have less and less survival places around them. Is it that urgent now? Is it real? Well, according to IPCC, this is really happening looking at the temperature of the Earth in the last 100 years and putting projections on the future. In fact, people who are born in 2020s will experience hot and very hot weather for the rest of their life. So this is a realistic situation. That means this is going to impact our children and their future generation as well. Then you probably have heard that this 1.5 degrees in the Paris Agreement, and why is that 1.5 degrees? So together in the Paris Agreement in 2015, it was proven and supported by scientists that by 2100, if the Earth's temperature is increased to 1.5 degrees, the Earth is still managing that kind of risks. The Earth will adapt. But if we don't do anything to take actions to manage such kind of increase, we are at the projection of the red curve or even higher. So today, the desired action is to bring down the temperature according to the blue curve. In reality, we are somewhere probably between the green and the red, which means the temperature increase is going to be more than 2 degrees. Now, what does it mean? And also that in the recent report on 4th November, that there are already evidence to say that we are not managing the increase in temperature. So, when the Earth is experiencing more than 2 degrees, the consequences by the Earth scientists are concluding that the Greenland and Arctic ice sheets will melt, and that will increase lots of coastal flooding. Imagine all these countries who are near the coast, including Singapore, including Indonesia, and all the coastal area probably around India, right? So the Earth doesn't know how to adapt itself anymore and doesn't know how to adjust itself for adapting to such a temperature change, which means that our ecosystems will be disrupted. There will be heat waves, there will be lots of flooding, there will be impact onto food supply, and in fact, whether human or animals, we might not survive. In Singapore alone, our government has done 3 situations of projection. Now, already we saw in 2024, there are 122 days that are heating above 35 degrees. And in 3 scenarios, we're talking about low emission, the average increase could be about 1.5, 1.7, or medium emission or the high emission. The number of very hot days will be in different situations. If we managed it, we probably still have 120 over days of hot weather per year. But if it's a medium emission situation, it'll be hitting 200 over days. But if it's a high emission situation, all year round, we won't have temperature more than 35 degrees. How do you feel, Arun?
I have not been here longer, Clara. I've been here for 4 years. Even within the 4 years, I have seen how the temperature has gone up, right? I mean, my early part of the first 2 years was okay, but now I feel increasingly hot. Even when I go back to India to see my family, I see the same pattern, the same place where I went for schooling. It's much hotter now. And, sometimes people are not, seeing that, but the data talks louder than the words, right? So thanks for bringing this statistics. It's a bit worrying that, the number of days we have to actually have those hot days in a year. We'll see.
Yeah, therefore, Singapore government has very strong net zero plan journey and, promoting and asking everybody to be taking actions against climate change is everybody's responsibility. So beyond Singapore, let's look at what is happening in the last few days, weeks, and months. You probably have read from the news that there are floodings in India. There are floodings in Vietnam. Just last few days and currently, in fact, Thailand is still experiencing lots of flooding in the southern part of Thailand. And last month, Japan has the same situation. So we can't be waiting for a superhero to tell us what to do and fix the issues. Actually, we all need to take actions. Looking a bit further, there are already very drastic situations happening in Africa. You can see that foodborne diseases are being realized. Waterborne diseases are also being seen. And then there is a threatening of our food supply and water supply as well. In fact, one of my good friends who is an expert in sustainability is doing an experimental studies with one of the hospitals to look into how climate change impact our health. Well, I would just want to say that it is not about the health. It is actually lives,
True.
impacting lives. So let's come to the topic about digital sustainability. What does it mean? Why digital? Why sustainability? It refers to the use of digital technologies and resources to ensure long-term environmental, social, and economic well-being. So as we use technology to drive down the negative impact of climate change. But as we implement this technology, we also need to operate them in a very responsible way that we minimize negative impact. Let's go further a bit. What does it make up of? So we look at it as 2 sides of the coins, or you look at the typical iceberg below the iceberg or above the iceberg. The digital for green on the top, it is when we talk about using technology to drive climate, to control and reduce risk of climate change. That goes with reducing waste, that goes with being resourceful, that goes being awareness of carbon footprint and so on. But the more technology you implement, the more ICT or CO2 that it can be emitted. So therefore, the top part of it is the green ICT part is then how do we manage it? How do we implement it properly? And Arun is going to share with us in the later few minutes more about that. So let me just elaborate a little bit about green ICT. Those people who are managing ICT environment, you know that operating your systems in the cloud will be more energy efficient than your own data center. Of course, there must be also the right business reasons. There are certain companies that need to have their own data center, but using cloud solutions with the hyperscalers, they tend to have more capability to manage low emission in the data centers, right? Then there's hardware devices. Instead of saying every 3 years we're going to replace our hardware, can we stretch our hardware a little bit more? The embodied carbon CO2 of our hardware is rather high, whether it's PC, whether it's server, or even the phone. And then the next part is really about all the applications that we use, including AI. There are different ways where we can measure the green software footprint and also the deployment of AI, which I'm sure you can't wait for Arun to tell you more, right? Now, so this is the part where we operate ICT. Then the next part is about deploying them. How can we deploy them in a smart way, such as smart energy grids, such as how do you reduce waste in agricultural processes? How do you implement smart buildings where we regulate the use of energy, the cooling systems? And how do we optimize supply chain, whether it is logistics, transportation, shipping, and so on, right? So this is the part where digital technology can help in reducing carbon footprint and water wastage. So ideally, if we were to do digital transition and we also look into sustainability, there is a sweet spots that we can do with optimal results. We interview about 40 to 50 companies, and many of them share us their journey of going through digital transformation and also sustainability. So I saw many of these overlaps of behaviors and best practices can come together. So my passion or my dream is if we were to spend $1 in digital investment, can we make it green at the same time?
Yeah.
Right. So this is the part where everybody is going to talk about using more AI.
Yes.
And Arun is going to be very helpful in the next few minutes to tell us how AI play a role in achieving sustainability.
So thank you for setting such a great context as to why it is important. Back to with the numbers, and I think that's the most important part. So today I would like to cover mainly on building the AI system. The last couple of years have been AI everywhere, but all the sustainability measures we've been doing has been going on for like few years. So we'll just deep dive into AI. For people on the call, you heard as digital, sustainability, you heard as ICT. They're all interchangeable words. And in 10 years before we called as tech, ICT. Now everything is called as AI and everything that encompasses. So just look at from the AI angle, and we will get to the details when it comes. I think today's session we would like to divide in two parts. Right, one is, Clara talked about how do we use technology to solve a sustainability problem, and two is how do we actually make the technology itself more sustainable. And I think that for that, the most important part is how do we first measure that? Because we can't improve what we cannot measure.
Agreed.
So we'll focus on measuring of those things, and we've got some good frameworks to talk about. Coming to the AI, in the last few years, the amount of energy consumptions, if you look at it, have skyrocketed. We have predicted this like 5 years before to say when the AI comes, the data center consumptions are going to be higher. But in fact, it's actually going higher than the forecast. If you look at the predicted 2027 number, which is 212 terawatts per hour, I mean, if you compare that, that's basically the amount of energy spent for a country like Spain. That's in 2027. And we are at a very early stage of AI. We're just starting to use ChatGPT. It's just starting to use all those.
Could be even higher.
Could be even higher, right? Because we're still trying to unlock the business use case and people are still figuring out. So this is going to continuously going up, right? And I think the question is how, as business, as an individual, we can do something to keep it to control. The other important statistics you can see is that, We talk a lot on energy, but I think one thing we take it for granted is the water. There is also prediction that, when you talked about the why part, Clara, you talked about the flooding, you talked about supply chain problems, you talked about the water problems. We also need a huge amount of water to cool the data center. Certain countries in European regions are better because of the weather. And if you take countries like Singapore, we are tropical, and therefore we need a lot of water to cool the data center. So I think every time we talk about energy efficiency, we can't just assume the energy as a carbon, but also the water that is needed. Okay, so what are the 4 things that you really need to, cater to when you build AI models or AI systems? So number 1 is the hardware. What kind of hardware you're going to use? If you've got this TPUs, you've got this GPUs. Even recently, the Gemini model from Google has apparently said it's taking less energy to run the query. So these things are going to keep on coming, right? 2 weeks before we didn't have Gemini 3, right? We've got something new. And by the time, in 2 weeks' time, there's going to be something else. So the question is how quickly we can understand the new models, how quickly we can adapt to them, how quickly we can upskill on them. Number 2 is the infrastructure capacity. All these models currently, running in different AWS data center, Azure, Google Cloud, they are also working on making sure how the capacity is utilized. We can write the best software, but if it doesn't really efficiently use the hardware, we will still have the problem. So, a lot of people are now thinking, how do we make it more efficient in both parts? Because the more energy is more expensive, which means more operational cost. And therefore, inevitably, people are going to look at to optimize the cost. And the third thing is the energy and water usage, which we briefly covered. The amount of water needed to cool the data center is important. And the fourth one is very key, and I think which is why we are running this session today. Those are hardware, software, and energy, but it's us, the people who develop them. It's the people who get trained on them makes the difference.
So, but main bulk, would it be just the cloud provider who do the job, or?
Very good question. It's actually 2 parts. So cloud providers will have to do their part to make sure that the data center is well designed, the cooling is taken care, the air condition is taken care. Think about chips that is, much more efficient. But then when we use the data center as a software developer or an ML engineer, we need to really know how to use it effectively. It's like you go into the kitchen. If you want to make a good food, you really need to know how to use the ingredients. And I think that's why it's important that for all the software developers or AI developers to understand how do you take those measures? Because the hardware is there, right? If you don't code it well, you're going to spend a lot of capacity wastage. And I think that's what we'll cover today on how do we ensure those things are taken care. One of the important things is, one is as an individual what we do, and 2 is also where the policies and regulations are going. Somehow we need both to bring this change. We can't just as an individual, hey, what can we do? But the policy would also affect, be it COP, be it the United Nations climate change or sustainable development goals. I think one thing I would like to call out is Europe is obviously much more matured and leading, because if you talk to any CXOs there, they've got a KPI to reduce the carbon, right? So inevitably, they're going to look into ways to reduce it. And I think in Asia, we are slowly coming. But what I'm positive about is what Singapore can do in this region. Every time I see Singapore on green, green is not new to Singapore, right?
Mm-hmm.
Make Singapore greener. It's a notion been there for many decades, and with a high green density, I think we are much more in a better place. And I think that's already been seen in the investments happening in data center, and what kind of regulations should be there. Be it and there is a green paper on from IMDA and GovTech say, hey, if you're building data center, you have to do X, Y, Z. So we are seeing a lot of these
frameworks.
Frameworks coming in, and Singapore organizations taking a stand on it to say, how can we adopt? So even the other countries are coming, like in Southeast Asia, like Indonesia and Malaysia. I think as a partners, we can definitely bring this change in this region. And going back to what you said, we can't wait for others to tell what to do. we have to
Do
be that
something.
advocate and do something. And I think I'm seeing a lot of positive traits on where Singapore is leading to. Okay, coming back to the AI model, right? So if you are one of the data scientists or AI engineer or an ML engineer or a software developer, right? Could be anyone. You need 5 things to really look at, right? When you develop a model. First thing is the data. How much data do you need? You're going to just boil the entire ocean by saying, hey, I want so many billion parameters, or you just want limited parameters because your use case don't need so much of them. Second is the model selection. As you know, we know that every day there is a new model coming. How do we pick the right model? You can actually use the same ChatGPT to tell the best model. That's a whole way of using it for your own advantage. And the third part is a model evaluation, right? So, see, there are a lot of B2C models like ChatGPT, Gemini, or Perplexity we use for different purpose. But enterprise are also using different models like Cloud, etc. Because what is needed for their B2B is different than what we need for B2C, right? So in those occasions, when we go and develop for enterprise-wide model, you don't need so many parameters, So you need to really curate it for that particular organization. So let's say we create a model for NUS. We just have to make sure that we get the NUS relevant data frameworks. And it's a trade-off, right? It's a trade-off between how much of accuracy I need, precision I need, versus how much of data I need to go into.
And can the model carbon footprint be measured?
Yes, and it's not there fully matured yet, Clara, but everybody is now, there is no public information on saying this model is better in carbon efficiency. There are few statistics to say if you query a certain model, how many joules of energy you are being spent. They say every query is between like 1 to 5 joules and you convert into kilowatts. But I think it will come eventually, because what we're seeing is the moment they wanted to reduce the dollar being spent on data center. And that's what I tell my clients, you don't need to worry about sustainability. You worry about the cost optimization. That will naturally lead to carbon savings, And I think that's where we are going into say, all these models will eventually, make it open and say, hey, this is the amount of energy we are spending. And then there's a modern deployment, right? So once you decide the evaluation of the model, what kind of inference you need from it, and how do you integrate with the model? So you may get a open source model, but then you need to integrate into your existing ecosystem. How do you make it more efficient when you integrate? And finally, the maintenance and governance. And I think I really liked when you talked about the embodied carbon and laptops and mobile phones. The same applies for AI model, right? Sometimes we get this multiple version released by companies. What's happening to the old model? Is that an incremental version, or it's decommissioned, or what's happening? If you spend so much of money and training, where is it? What's the kind of life cycle for that? And I think those things are important when you think about it. So while this is the whole model when people create, I think we cannot forget as a user of the model, right? Sometimes you go ask simple things to ChatGPT, what does the weather look like? You don't need that. You can still use Google to tell the weather forecast, So that kind of the decision making sits with individuals like us. And
So not everything need to use AI to
you
solve.
don't need, because sometimes I know it's been it's been the talk of the town, but if you ask the same question that you could have asked a simple search engine, AI will have to has to go all the way to the data center. It does the whole inference in the background, and it does the feedback and give it to you. It's okay. It's a simple query, but you don't need to do that for all of them. And certain things that we're seeing in organization as well, if it is an automation that is needed, we can do it simply automation. You don't need to just, amplify it with the AI, right? So the most important part is identifying the right use case, whether the use case can give you the value, I think these are the two parts where we're seeing challenge. But also the other thing is, even once the organizations have done these two, they're unable to scale it, right? So you may find a small department, let's say in an academic institution, hey, let's do this model. But then to get the full value, everybody should be using the same model to bring that efficiency. So that's where I think we are still in an early stage of proving the value realization. Obviously, the AI bubble is also being talked about, right? So we need to see where this lands. I think the one other thing that I want to segue away from here is the whole AI framework that we have, slightly going deeper, right? Because when you create a model, you need to make sure that, you're preparing the model with the right data. You spend a lot of time in data engineering of it, how much of data you need. Be that conscious decision maker when you do that. And then when you integrate the system, right, with your ecosystem, what kind of model you want to evaluate, or where you want to put into your system. And then the whole runtime operations and end of life. The reason why I brought this here, Clara, is that it's a good kind of bridge to my next slide, which is to Green Software Foundation.
Yes, tell us more.
So I mean, all these things are, 5 years before, or maybe 7, 8 before, we talked about how do you evaluate the software, right? Now we are talking about how to evaluate the AI. But at the time, there was no framework. At the time, even as an individual, like I wanted to do something, I don't know where to start, all right? And this is where the Green Software Foundation comes. So it's a not-for-profit organization, co-founded between Accenture and Microsoft at the time, but now we've got a lot of key members like, Google, UBS, you can see industries, you can see the big tech providers. One thing to call out here is, we operate over 190 countries, and there is a global workforce of 1.5 million people, which means imagine all these people are getting trained in green software. And the real call out here is Singapore is the first country to have 2 government-related entities to be part of the foundation. One is IMDA and 2 is the GovTech. So this is where I feel more confident being here that, we are actually setting stone for others to follow.
Excellent.
So coming to the foundation itself, that's what we do. And, it's worked as a community, open source. We can go to the GitHub and look at all the specifications and frameworks. You can play around with it. There are multiple projects within Foundation, be it how do you measure the software carbon intensity, or what kind of software development kit you should use, what kind of patterns you have when you do the architecture for a new IT project, and what kind of external bodies we are working with.
Are these standards rather matured already?
So it's a great question, right? So the models, I would say, there are a couple of things that are really mature in terms of, if you look at the SCI, the first thing, which is where we've got ISO approved. People know that, and if you do in any IT work, you need the frameworks that is standardized. And this is a big milestone for the foundation, because now it's been approved as an ISO framework, which means you can actually use this formula or calculations in your project to say how the carbon is measured. Maybe I'll give an example of how this can be used, right? So if you're doing any software development or any AI model, you need to be first doing the baseline measurement, right? Otherwise, we would not know what we need to improve. To do the baseline calculations, where do we start, right? So if it is a laptop, the supplier can give you the embodied carbon, right? So they will have the whole life cycle of building, blah, blah, blah. Then it gets delivered to you through supply chain. There is a bit of a CO2 emitted there. Then it comes to you, then you hook into the laptop charger, you are spending on energy. All those things is put together is your total carbon emission for your laptop. Easy, right? I mean, relatively easy. Not very easy to calculate, but easy. But when it comes to the whole AI or whole software, it's tough because there is a development team and there is a user. And when these two working on the application, it goes to the data center, it goes to the cable. The whole thing is happening in the background, right? And for that, we need to come up with the measuring of what we can measure. So what this framework tells us is, the SEI is equal to E star I, with E star I is nothing but the operational emission. So if you take your laptop, every day that you use, that's your operational emission. Then you add your embodied emission, which is your laptop's total, at the time it came to you from the time of manufacturing. And you put together both the operational emission and the embodied emission. Then you divide by your laptop, right? Here, the R is a functional unit. So I would call it mobile phone as a device or laptop as a device. And we get a calculation. Now, once you do this, you will have a carbon equivalent of CO2 that you're emitting. Then we can look at improvements, right? You may be thinking, Arun, why are we even talking about measuring this baseline? Because we really need to get to the baseline. Otherwise, it's very, very hard to come up with improvements.
We need to measure.
Yes, measuring is very important, right? Because, you talked about 1.5 COP targets. All these are based on measurements. But when that get cascaded to enterprise or institution, we have got targets. We want to be net zero. But how do we do it, right? We can change certain things in supply chain. If you run a taxi company, you can change to EVs. But if you run a big organization where you've got IT, where you've got AI models running, how are you going to do that, right? I think that's more important. Maybe I'll do I know we talked about laptop. Let's just probably talk a little bit on application, a real world application, right? So if you take, let's say you're building an app, you're a software developer, you just want to build an app. Maybe you want to do some, AI agents, agentic AI within the app, whatever the use cases. The first thing is you need to set the boundary for the two. So am I going to measure the carbon of this app, or am I going to measure the carbon of app interacting with the user, interacting with the data center? So start with a good boundary. Otherwise, we will never get to the measurement. And also the next thing is a functional unit. So if you are, let's say you're creating a mobile app, are you going to measure based on per user, or are you going to measure based on, per transaction? Like if you use our, in Singapore, if you use some of the bank apps and taxi apps, they say, oh, you saved so much of carbon. If you use an EV vehicle, it tells you the carbon that you saved. Those are amazing to see, right? And I think, which means they've taken the decision to show per user, but they would have a view. So I think the whole point is you make sure that what is your functional unit is going to be. And then the whole computing environment, so now you decided the app, where you're going to host it. When you host, what kind of providers you're going to choose. This is where it becomes key. So if I, as an individual, I as a company, want to create an app to be more efficient, so I'm going to pick the data center that is more efficient, right? I'm not going to pick the one that's emitting a lot of carbon. So that's why all these data centers have got, targets to help us, because it's very clear. You can actually, when you go to the regions, you can pick, if you pick like Iceland region, it's more efficient. Of course. And I think that's where it's important. Where do you pick the computing environment, right? And then followed by, what kind of pipeline you use, what kind of platform you're going to use. And then you'll be able to come up with a calculation. Yeah. So I think maybe at the Q&A session, if people have any questions around this, please feel free to, drop your questions, because this is one of the key takeaways we would like to leave it to the audience today, because we all want you to go back and start measuring something and then be that kind of change in the place you do. Okay. I think with that, I would just like to summarize, Clara, here. I know we talked quite a lot on AI and software measurement. Anywhere when we talk about technology, remember this 7 impact areas. They're all connected. They're not separated. The software development lifecycle, if you're a coder, tester, you will have to follow the life cycles. It's making sure, how do you bring sustainability in that? What kind of models you're using, what kind of programming you're using. UI UX is another great thing, right? So be it Instagram or Netflix, you've got this dark mode, which means naturally you will spend less energy when you use those applications. Green AI, we did talk a lot today. Blockchain, you know the topic as a technology. It's a great tech. There are a lot of prediction on blockchain helping us to reduce the energy efficiency, because imagine if every code is going to cloud. Now, if it goes to every individual computers at home, then it makes more efficient, because your same query, it can be routed to people in the countries where the energy is not expensive, or it can route to different countries. And therefore, the whole blockchain concept for green is, I would say, it's very nascent stage. It's not there. But if we really make that happen, I think we can see a lot of savings there. And then the green data. This is all the more important because the whole AI runs on a data, right? So how much of data you really want it, right? You want those trillion rows of data, or you think the last 10 years is good enough? If it is 30 years of data not doing any value, let's not have them, just have what is relevant. And the data center is what we talked on, the cloud and the infrastructure. So if you see, all of these material areas are all kind of connected in some form. And I think it's important for the audience to think about this when you start doing your tech projects.
And in each of these areas, there's quite extensive, extensive practices behind it.
Yes.
And probably skills and knowledge about each of the area.
Absolutely, yeah. Maybe except the blockchain, Clara, but I think remaining, if you go to the Green Software Foundation, there are a lot of papers, position papers, and also clear detail of how do you measure it. You can even pull out the data of data centers emission to do the calculation. So, this is a great place to start for somebody who wants to get in. I think one thing we spend a lot of time on how to make the technology sustainable. But I think maybe in the follow-up session, we could do another one to say, what are the ways we can use technology to make it more sustainable, right?
Yes, in fact, ISS has 2 courses on digital sustainability. They're focused on understanding the importance of sustainability, the sustainability marketplace, and also the digital part, which is on software development, on green products, on green AI. And, so we get quite deep into how do you do the measurements. And they are all SSG funded courses, which is quite attractive for people to attend. So I do welcome a lot of our listeners or participants to ask more about those questions and how we can help. But there's still a lot to develop.
That's good. Good.
So
I think that's come finally to the end, Clara. I think maybe I would like to just say thank you for having me here. And it's my pleasure to talk about this topic, which I'm very, very passionate about. And I know you're also very passionate in this subject. So thanks for having me here.
Thank you. And thank you for all the listeners, participants in these sessions. And we will be very happy to do in the next Q&A session. Thank you.
We will now take questions from the audience. Please type your questions into the Q&A section of the chat.
The first questions, let me take them, and then following, maybe Arun, later on we can look into the questions nature, and then you can take them, okay?
Yeah.
So for the first questions, for an organization just starting out, what is the first concrete step to take to reduce digital's own footprint without slowing down transformation? Great question. I'm sure in organizations today, you have your inventory lists of your hardware and your software, and also your data centers log, whether it's provided by your cloud providers or your own operations. By reviewing them and calculating them, how is their utilization, whether you are over providing, and itself will already see some of the opportunities to reduce the capacity, to reposition some of the utilization from high dirty, we call it dirty energy level to a clean energy level, itself, that will already bring you quite quick wins. This can be achieved in weeks, and it should not even slow you down for any transformation that you're planning. And anything new, you can ride on such practices and go ahead and look into proper capacity planning. The more you're optimal in your utilization, the more CO2 reductions that you can achieve. Okay? So I hope that answers this question. Right, the next question, Annie? How should we decide when a Gen AI use case is worth it or that it will reduce emissions? Arun, would you like to take this question?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's an interesting question, right? Because so one is actually identifying the use case itself. There's two parts of this question. Is how should we decide when a use case is worth it? So far, if you look at the use cases, they are generally to do with productivity increase and or a cost optimization or something to unlock a value from a large set of data. So the reality is that when any business use cases run for generative AI, I don't think sustainability is or the green software index is part of the scenario, right? So that's where I think the way to ensure the green index is to first understand the energy consumption. If a use case that you would like to run requires X amount of data center usage, and that's going to result in some dollar as an operational cost, and that is the value that will tell you how much of carbon that's going to emit. So currently, if you ask me if people are actually looking at the CO2, maybe not, but what they're definitely looking into it is the dollar that's being spent on the use case. So which is where I think if you are thinking of whether to run this use case or not, I'm sure there will be a possible operating expenses running on a cloud or running on a LLM model. Just use the SCI that we just talked about, the calculations from Green Software Foundation. You should be able to understand the CO2. And once you have that, then you put it all together at the time of decision making. I hope that answers the question, but happy to deep dive if you need a further, tier two level of details.
May I add a little bit more
Yeah.
to the response to this? And I think eventually we have to look into what problems we are trying to solve, right? And look into our business processes, and eventually also to say which can be enhanced by AI, what type of AI. It doesn't mean everything you need to use a Gen AI. Traditional AI in machine learning and so on are quite energy efficient and do very precise and accurate outcome. So, the thoughts about really knowing what type of AI to use is very important. And therefore, you're strengthening your AI know-how, knowing what AI to apply, and then you can justify whether it is worth it. Yes? Okay. There is a next question that is about SCI. Can that
Okay.
question be posted? Oh, okay. If we apply SCI on an existing AI product, what data do we need first and how do we set boundaries so results aren't bogus? Right. So, Arun, can you help us that you're an SCI expert?
So, existing AI product. So, I believe what they mean by that is an existing AI model, right? And so, I think the first is you set the boundaries, right? Are you going to measure that AI model itself, or are you going to measure the overall emissions? For example, let's say me as an individual trying to use ChatGPT, are you going to include my laptop electricity usage and then my network
and then followed by my query that ran on ChatGPT, and then whatever ChatGPT takes to spend the energy, right? So there's multiple areas that you can go. Because the whole carbon emission is at a very early stage, I would say define the boundary that is measurable, right? In this case, the first data that you need is setting the boundaries. Number two is what kind of data you're going to decide. Is it just going to be, hey, I'm going to measure this on a hyperscaler like AWS, Azure, or Google, or I'm just going to measure based on the application that is running. So the data that you need is how big is the data, how often I'm going to use the tokens and inference. So if you can actually set those boundaries within the product, you should be able to get a reasonable, a baseline measurement. I know, I'm probably answering very clinically, Clara, but I think the question is interesting because, uh, you know, the AI product itself has multiple periphery and APIs and people using from different places. So I think if somebody wants to measure, they just want to keep the boundaries shorter and smaller, so that then they can expand and extend.
Well, I just want to share that when we run our courses about such kind of topics, this is exactly the issues that we address.
Yeah.
How do you look into network impact, data impact, storage, design, UX, and so on and so forth. So it's not something that we can probably answer in a few sentences, but it's quite a topic to address in each of the component. But once you acquire these fundamental skills, they kind of apply to many situations. Yeah. So once again, I want to highlight that some of these are exactly the pain or the opportunity that I see in our digital or ICT community can pick up. Yeah. Okay. There is a question that says that I do not think the sustainability effort can keep up with the explosion of AI. What do you think? Let me just do a little bit of my attempt of answering that, and Arun, and then you can add on to it, okay? So today, honestly, when we talk about AI, we think energy. You can Google the bit, the ex-CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt, they talk a lot about, when we want to go AI, our new energy provision need to be that much and that much, right? So we talk about new energy, renewable energy. So all these hyperscalers are quite aware that for AI to grow, the adoption of renewable energy need to take place, and each of this hyperscaler who generally hosted the AI solutions or AI environment have very ambitious net zero target for them, right? So this topic is certainly being realized and being looked into. And Arun, maybe you can add on more.
I'll just put a spin off, what clients, talk about this, right? Because clients also have similar questions to say, if you go and speak to any CXOs right now, if you ask them, hey, what's your top KPIs, and they'll probably think of, making those Gen AI working in their organizations. If you ask them like, are you thinking of CO2? Maybe not. But I think one thing that really resonate with them on sustainability is that, when all this explosion of AI happens, the moment we explain the real correlation of, the dollar being spent and the energy being consumed is equivalent to the carbon being consumed for it. So because they always think that, hey, sustainability is a cost to it. No, sustainability efforts can actually make the organizations profitable, because the moment if the efforts are being reduced to reduce the FinOps operations, it'll eventually reduce the the CO2. So I think even for us, when we try to speak and say, hey, these are the things you should do, but the moment we actually showed the value of how much of the savings from the expenses can result in CO2, that's where these things are being really taken as top KPIs. So yes, it is an early stage, but I think this is never going to go away, right? And you're going to see all those things coming into maturity over the next few years.
Okay. The next question is about app measuring SCI. Is there an already apps for SCI calculations?
Um, so the application, okay, so there is, okay, I believe someone is asking whether they can input the information, whether it can basically tell what's the SCI, right? I think currently it is not there, but some parts of it is there in GitHub. So if you go to the Green Software Foundation and if you look for SCI calculations, and there are a few automated models that you can use to really accelerate your calculation. It's not like it's not a simple app like you can input and get out, but it really accelerates your calculation. So please do take an effort to go to the GSF website and search for SEI, and there are a lot of GitHub links where you can also contribute to the development, because it's an open source not for profit organization.
Okay. Personally, I think that to drive this topic as a technology community, we need to first understand the fundamentals, understand the impact. You need to believe in you can take an actions to drive and manage climate change and improve the earth. So that is a very important part. And once you have that fundamental understanding, that you're convinced and so on, and I must share that even among my own colleagues, it took us a while to understand what this topic is, why is it important, and how it impacts each of their work. Once we have that understanding, we will start putting that into our mind to think about it as from our system design, from our interactions, from how we drive solution. So it is important to get that basic right, so as to create this whole urgency and support for the initiatives. So thank you everybody for participating and asking good questions. Today we will end the sessions here, and we look forward to connecting with you in our next webinar. And I wish everybody a Merry Christmas and a very happy 2026 to come.